I never thought I'd hear those words from my own son. Mom, please don't embarrass us tonight. Just sit quietly. Do you know what it feels like to give your life to someone, to raise them, protect them, sacrifice everything, and then be told you're nothing more than a shadow in the corner? That's the moment I realized I wasn't invited as a guest. I was brought as an obligation. When the phone call first came, I was overjoyed. Mom, we'd love to have you for dinner, he said. My heart lit up. I thought, finally. Finally, they want me close. I went through my closet, picked my nicest dress, even wrapped up a little gift. I imagined laughter, warmth, maybe even a hug that felt like old times. But underneath my excitement was something else, a heaviness I couldn't shake. Something about the way his voice sounded. Rushed, distant. Still, I ignored it. I told myself, this is my family, this is my son, this is my chance. And then, just minutes before dinner, he looked me in the eye and said the words I'll never forget. Mom, don't embarrass us. Just sit quietly. I remember the phone call as if it had just happened yesterday. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the house feels too still and the ticking of the clock on the wall becomes the loudest sound in the room. I was folding laundry, one of those endless chores that seem to grow heavier when you're alone. Then the phone rang. I saw my son's name light up on the screen. My heart skipped. You see, it wasn't often that he called just to talk anymore. His life had become busy, full of work and his own family. I told myself not to expect too much, but still, a little spark of hope flickered inside me. I answered quickly. Hello? Son? My voice carried more excitement than I intended, but I couldn't hide it. His tone was casual, hurried, like he was multitasking. Hey, Mom, we're having a dinner at the house on Saturday. Thought you might want to come. Thought I might want to come. Those words echoed in my mind. To him, maybe it was just an invitation tossed out in between errands. But to me, it was a lifeline. I hadn't sat at his table in months. I hadn't heard his laughter in my own kitchen in what felt like years. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, almost afraid I'd lose the moment. Yes, I said quickly, maybe too quickly. Of course, I'd love to come. The call was short, only a few minutes. He had other things to do, other places to be. But when it ended, I sat there, with the phone still in my hand, a smile slowly spreading across my face. My son had invited me. My family wanted me there. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind wandered back through time, through the years when dinners were something I created for him. When he was a boy, I made sure our table was never empty. I cooked with whatever little we had, stretching meals so there was always enough. I remember his favorite, meatloaf on Fridays. I'd save the end pieces for him because he liked the crunch. As I thought about those times, I felt a warmth in my chest, a reminder that those moments weren't wasted. They had meaning. And maybe, just maybe, this dinner invitation meant he remembered too. Over the next few days, I began to prepare. You might think it's silly, but for me, getting ready was like preparing for something sacred. I opened my closet and stood there for a long time, running my hands over the dresses hanging in neat rows. Most of them were years old, but each one carried a memory. There was the blue dress I wore at his high school graduation, the cream-colored one from his wedding, where I watched him promise his life to someone else. I settled on a soft lavender dress. It wasn't new, but it felt gentle, welcoming. I laid it out carefully, smoothing the wrinkles as though I were smoothing the years that had stretched between us. Then came the gift. I couldn't arrive empty-handed. That's not how I raised him, and that's not how my own mother raised me. But what do you give a son who already seems to have everything? I went to a little shop downtown, the kind with shelves full of trinkets and home goods. I wandered for nearly an hour before I found it, a framed picture of a tree, its branches spreading wide, with the word family carved beneath. It wasn't expensive, but it was heartfelt. I imagined them placing it on a shelf, maybe in the living room, a reminder that no matter how far apart we seemed, our roots were still tangled together. When I brought it home, I wrapped it with care, choosing silver paper and tying it with a purple ribbon that matched my dress. As I taped the edges, I thought about how many gifts I had wrapped for him over the years, birthdays, Christmases, even just because days when he was little, I used to hide them under his bed so he would find them like treasures waiting to be discovered. Those memories flooded back in waves. Him as a boy, with wide eyes and messy hair, running into the kitchen as the smell of dinner filled the air. "What's for dinner, Mom?" he'd ask, his voice filled with curiosity and hunger. And no matter what I put on that table, whether it was a grand roast or just beans and rice, he always ate with gratitude. At least, back then he did. I spent the days before the dinner cleaning my small house as if guests were coming there instead. It was almost funny. No one was coming to my home, but I needed everything in order because my heart felt lighter when things were tidy. I polished the old photo frames, dusted the shelves, even baked cookies I knew no one would eat. Maybe it was my way of holding on to the ritual, of pretending life hadn't shifted so much. On the morning of the dinner, I woke early, nerves twisting in my stomach. I slipped into my lavender dress and pinned my hair the way I used to when I wanted to look my best. As I looked in the mirror, I saw the lines on my face, the wear of the years, but I also saw something else, hope. Hope that tonight would be different. I placed the gift in a small bag, held it close to my chest, and whispered to myself, "This is family. This is love. This is your chance." The drive to his house felt longer than it should have. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual. Every street I passed seemed to carry a memory. The park where I used to push him on the swings, the corner store where he begged me for candy, the road where I taught him how to drive. And as I pulled into his neighborhood, I noticed how different everything seemed. The houses were bigger, newer. His life had grown beyond mine in so many ways. When I parked in front of his home, I sat for a moment before stepping out. The house was beautiful, no denying that. Large windows, a perfectly manicured lawn, the kind of place you see in magazines. And yet, I wondered if somewhere inside those walls, there was still space for me. I took a deep breath, picked up the bag with the gift, and walked to the door. My heart beat faster with every step, not from fear exactly, but from longing. I wanted so badly to belong again, and as I stood there, about to knock, I whispered to myself, "He invited you. He wants you here. Tonight will be good." I believed it. I had to believe it, because in that moment, belief was all I had. I still remember the moment the door opened. The house was warm and bright on the outside, its golden light spilling across the lawn like something out of a postcard. But when the door swung open, the warmth didn't reach me. It was my daughter-in-law who answered. She looked at me the way one might glance at an unexpected delivery package left on the doorstep. Not angry, not even particularly unkind, but uninterested, impatient, as though my presence had already disrupted the rhythm of her evening. Her smile was polite, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hi. Come in," she said, stepping aside just enough for me to enter. I clutched the little gift bag tighter in my hand as I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of roasted meat and butter, but beneath it there was another scent, the scent of tension. It lingered in the silence between her words, in the way she turned quickly on her heel and walked ahead of me without another glance. I paused in the entryway, slipping off my coat, smoothing my lavender dress. I wanted to feel like I belonged there, but every detail reminded me I didn't. The house was spotless, polished floors, shining countertops. Family portraits lined the hallway, pictures of my son, his wife, their children. Yet none of me, not one. Before I could dwell on it, my son appeared. He walked toward me, and for a brief moment I saw the boy he used to be, running into my arms after school, shouting, "Mom, guess what happened today?" But the boy I remembered wasn't here anymore. What stood before me was a man, taller, older, sharper around the edges. He kissed my cheek quickly, almost as if to check off a box, then whispered, "Can I talk to you for a second, Mom?" Of course, I nodded, eager to hear whatever he had to say. I thought perhaps he'd thank me for coming, maybe even smile warmly the way he once did, but instead, he led me down the hallway, away from the dining room, until we stood in the shadow of the kitchen doorway, and then he turned to me, his face serious, his voice low. "Mom," he said, "please don't embarrass us tonight. Just sit quietly." The words hit me harder than any blow ever could. Don't embarrass us. Sit quietly. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. My chest ached as though he'd reached inside and squeezed my heart in his hand. I stared at him, my own son, the baby I had carried in my arms, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the teenager I had defended when the world felt cruel. And now, that boy was looking at me as though I were a burden. I wanted to ask him, "Embarrass you how? By being myself? By existing at your table?" But the words caught in my throat. All I could do was swallow the hurt, the way I had swallowed so many disappointments before. Inside my mind, memories tumbled out like fragile glass, shattering across the floor. I remembered the nights I worked 2 jobs, just to keep a roof over our heads. I remembered standing behind the counter at a diner, hands cracked from washing dishes and scalding water, so that he could have new shoes for school. I remembered walking home late at night, too tired to eat, too tired to even cry, whispering to myself, "It's worth it. He'll grow up strong. He'll grow up happy." And he did grow up. But happy? Strong? Yes. Loving? Kind? I wasn't sure anymore. I thought about the Christmases when I went without so he wouldn't have to. I thought about skipping meals so he could have seconds. I thought about selling the only piece of jewelry my mother left me just to pay his college deposit. And now, after everything, he looked at me not as his mother, but as a possible embarrassment. I smiled faintly, though it felt more like a grimace, and nodded. "Of course, dear," I whispered, though inside me something cracked. He smiled briefly, relieved, and walked back toward the dining room. I followed behind, slower, my feet heavy on the polished floor. As I walked, I thought about the irony. All his life I had raised him to speak, to be confident, to never let anyone silence him. I told him, "Your voice matters, son. Don't let the world make you small." And yet, here he was, silencing mine. The sting of those words didn't fade as the evening went on. They hung over me like a shadow, whispering that I was unwanted, unnecessary, too much. They told me I was no longer the center of his world, not even part of the circle. I was an outsider, tolerated only if I stayed quiet. Still, I sat at that table, my gift resting quietly at my side, my lavender dress smoothing neatly across my lap. I smiled when expected, nodded when looked at, but inside I was screaming with memories. I remembered his first day of school, how he clung to my hand, how I bent down and told him, "You'll be fine. You're brave. I'll be here when you come back." I remembered the teenage years, when he slammed doors and shouted, "You don't understand me," but still came back for dinner every night because he knew I'd be waiting with his plate. I remembered the night he called me from college, his voice breaking as he said he was overwhelmed, ready to quit. I stayed on the phone until morning, reminding him of his strength, reminding him that he was my son, and that meant he could overcome anything. And yet now here I was, told to be silent, to shrink into nothingness. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Not there, not in front of him, not in that house where every wall seemed to remind me that I no longer belonged. Instead, I swallowed my hurt and told myself, patience. There will be a time to speak. Maybe not now, maybe not even tonight, but one day your voice will be heard again, because a mother's silence may be long, but it is never empty. It carries years of sacrifice, years of love, years of unspoken truths waiting to break free. And that night, as I sat in that chair, silent and invisible, I began to realize maybe dessert would be sweeter than anyone expected. I took my seat at the table, careful not to scrape the chair too loudly against the floor. Funny, isn't it? In my own home, I never worried about the sound of a chair. In my kitchen, noise was life. Forks clinking, pans sizzling, children shouting over one another for the last roll. But here, in this house that was supposed to feel like family, I tried to be as small as possible, as quiet as the shadow of a guest who didn't belong. The table was beautiful, I'll admit that, perfectly set with polished silverware and crisp napkins folded neatly in triangles. A long candle flickered in the center, giving the whole room a warm glow. It was the kind of table setting you'd see in a magazine, and yet, for me, all that shine only made the coldness sharper. The others filled their seats quickly, my son at the head of the table, his wife beside him, their children chattering with excitement. Laughter came easily to them, as though they had been sharing inside jokes all along without me. They spoke about their day, about school projects, about a neighbor who had bought a new car. Their voices rose and fell like music, but I was not part of the song. No one turned to me. No one asked, "How was your week, Mom?" Or, "What's new with you, Grandma?" Instead, I sat in silence, hands folded neatly on my lap, the gift bag resting at my feet. I smiled when someone glanced in my direction, but no one lingered long enough to notice whether that smile reached my eyes. I nodded at their stories, but no one asked for mine. It was as though I were invisible. I tried to tell myself it was fine. "Be patient," I whispered in my mind. "This is his house, his family. Don't make it about you. Tonight, you're just here to listen." So I listened. I listened as my granddaughter spoke about her piano recital, her little fingers tapping at the edge of the table to mimic the keys. I remembered when her father was that age, sitting at the same kitchen table in our old house, learning to play Twinkle Twinkle on a beat-up keyboard I bought secondhand. I wanted so badly to say, "Your father once played just like you." I wanted to share the memory, connect the past to the present, but I held my tongue. Then my grandson told a story about his soccer game, about scoring the winning goal. Everyone cheered, clapped, laughed. I thought of the nights I stood in the rain, watching his father play soccer as a boy. I wanted to say, "Your dad once scored a goal so big, he ran straight into my arms afterward," but I stayed silent. Every time a memory surfaced, every time my heart reached out to bridge the gap, I swallowed it back down. I sat there with my thoughts locked tight behind my lips, afraid that if I spoke, I might be seen as embarrassing, as unwanted. And the longer I sat in silence, the heavier it became. It wasn't just quiet. It was suffocating. My mind screamed with words I couldn't say, with stories that wanted to leap from my chest. I thought of the nights I worked the late shift, coming home so tired my feet throbbed, but still cooking dinner so my son wouldn't go hungry. I thought of how I'd stretch a single paycheck to cover groceries, rent, and school clothes, always telling him, "Don't worry, baby, Mama's got it covered." But no one at that table knew those stories anymore. They belonged to me alone, tucked away like old photographs in a box no one cared to open. The laughter at the table grew louder, echoing in my ears. My son laughed at a joke his wife made, leaned close to her, shared a whisper. Their children giggled, bouncing in their seats, and there I was, sitting quietly, smiling politely, aching inside. Do you know what it feels like to be surrounded by people you love and yet feel utterly invisible? It's a loneliness unlike any other. It's not the loneliness of an empty house, not the quiet of a room with no voices. No, it's the loneliness of being present, physically there, but erased from the story. I felt tears sting at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back quickly. No, don't cry here. Don't give them a reason to see you as weak. I lifted my glass of water and took slow sips, each one a distraction, a way to hold myself together. I chewed carefully, slowly, so I wouldn't have to speak. I let their conversations wash over me like waves, crashing and tumbling, while I sat anchored in silence. But inside, the storm was growing, because every laugh that ignored me, every story told without me, was a reminder of all I had given, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the dreams I set aside so my son could have his. I thought about the times I told him, "Don't worry about me, just focus on your future." And now, here I was, a piece of the past he'd rather keep quiet, out of sight, out of mind. Still, I chose patience. I told myself, there will be a time, there will be a moment when your voice will matter again. Not yet, not now, but soon. So I sat in silence, listening, waiting, holding my words like a secret in my chest. And though no one else noticed, I felt it. The silence wasn't just mine anymore. It was growing heavier in the room, waiting for the right moment to break. Because silence, when held too long, doesn't disappear. It builds, it gathers strength, and when it finally shatters, it does so loudly enough to shake the walls. That night, at that dinner table, I sat in silence. But in my silence, I was gathering something far more powerful than words. I was gathering truth. And truth, once spoken, has a way of changing everything. As I sat there, listening to voices that never turned my way, my eyes drifted across the polished table. The flicker of candlelight danced against the silverware, and for just a moment, it pulled me backward in time, back to another table, not this one, not the long, elegant table dressed in linen and glass, but the old wooden one that sat in the center of my kitchen for nearly 20 years. It wasn't pretty, that table. Its legs were uneven, its surface covered in scratches and stains from years of family life. There was a mark where my son had spilled grape juice when he was 5, another where a hot pan had burned the wood during one hectic Thanksgiving. To anyone else, it looked worn down, but to me it was beautiful, because every scratch was a story, every stain a memory. That table was where we lived. I could see it now, as clearly as if I were still there. My son sitting across from me, swinging his legs because they didn't yet reach the floor, his cheeks full of mashed potatoes, his eyes lighting up as he told me about his day. He'd talk with such energy, waving his hands, sometimes spitting food out by accident, and I'd laugh until my stomach hurt. Dinner back then wasn't fancy. Most nights it was whatever I could manage. Spaghetti stretched with canned tomatoes, beans and rice seasoned with just enough spice to feel like more than it was. Some nights it was soup with too much water because payday hadn't come yet. But no matter how simple the meal, it was ours, and it was filled with laughter. He would tell jokes he barely understood, and I would laugh anyway, just to see the joy on his face. He'd sneak vegetables to the dog under the table, thinking I didn't notice. Sometimes we'd play little games, like who could take the biggest bite, or who could name 5 things they were grateful for before dessert. I remember his small hands clapping together in excitement, his eyes shining like stars. Those dinners weren't about the food. They were about us, about love, about togetherness. As I sat at this new table, surrounded by people who barely acknowledged me, I felt the ghost of that old kitchen pressing on my heart. I could almost hear the echo of his child's laughter, colliding painfully with the sound of his present laughter, laughter shared with his wife, his children, but not with me. The contrast was sharp. Back then, my voice filled the room. I was the heart of the table, the one who kept the stories alive, the one who asked the questions, who listened, who reminded him every day that he mattered. Now I was told to sit quietly. And so I did. But the silence was louder than any words, because as they talked, as they laughed, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding in. I remembered his 7th birthday, when I baked a lopsided cake because the oven was unreliable. He had grinned ear to ear, not caring that it leaned to one side, not caring that the frosting was uneven. To him, it was the most beautiful cake in the world because it was made with love. That night, he sat at the table and blew out the candles, his cheeks puffed, his eyes squeezed shut as he made a wish. And I wished too. I wished for his happiness, always. I remembered Thanksgiving, the year I could barely afford a turkey. I cooked chicken instead, seasoned it with herbs from the garden. He didn't mind. He piled his plate high and said, "Mom, this is the best meal ever." The pride in his little voice filled me with warmth so strong it could have lit the whole neighborhood. I remembered late nights when homework sprawled across that table, and I sat beside him with a cup of coffee, guiding him through fractions, spelling words, history facts. He grew frustrated, rubbed his eyes, wanted to quit. But I kept him going, telling him he was smart, telling him he could do anything. And when he finally got it, when he finally smiled and said, "I understand now, Mom," oh, the pride I felt. Those memories came back to me in waves, each one crashing against the cold reality of the present moment. Here I was at another table, his table. But now, instead of laughter, instead of sharing stories, I was a shadow, barely noticed. My presence didn't light him up anymore. My words weren't wanted. The silence pressed harder. I tried to comfort myself with the thought that at least he was happy. At least he had a family, a life that looked full and bright. That's what every mother wants, isn't it? For their child to grow, to build something greater. But even as I thought it, a question burned inside me. Why does his happiness mean my erasure? Why, in order for him to have this life, do I have to sit in silence, treated like a relic of the past, unworthy of the present? The laughter around me grew louder, almost mocking. They laughed at stories I wasn't part of, at jokes I didn't understand. They built a wall of words around themselves, and I was on the outside, looking in. I lowered my eyes to my plate, pushing food around with my fork. I could hear their joy, but I couldn't feel it. The distance between us was greater than the length of the table. And yet, even in that silence, even in that loneliness, my heart clung to the memories because they reminded me of who I had been. They reminded me that I mattered once. The little boy who once sat at my table, legs swinging, eyes bright, laughter ringing. He had needed me. He had loved me. He had looked at me like I was his whole world. And now, the man he had become looked at me like I was something to endure, something to hide. That truth burned heavy and sharp, pressing deeper with every passing minute. I sat there quietly, but inside I was screaming at the unfairness, at the way love could be so easily forgotten, at the way years of sacrifice could vanish like smoke. The silence became unbearable, but still I held it, because I had been told to, because I didn't want to ruin the evening, because part of me still believed. Maybe if I stayed patient, maybe if I endured this quiet, my son would remember. Maybe he'd turn to me. Maybe he'd smile. Maybe he'd ask, "Mom, do you remember when?" But he didn't. And the longer I waited, the heavier the silence grew, pressing against me like a weight I could no longer carry. That silence, it wasn't just mine anymore. It filled the whole room, unnoticed by everyone else, but crushing me with every breath. And in that moment, I realized something. Silence is not peace. Silence is not respect. Silence, when forced, is cruelty. And though I sat there with my lips pressed tight, my thoughts unspoken, I knew the silence couldn't last forever, because one day my voice would rise again. And when it did, it would carry not just my pain, but every memory, every sacrifice, every truth I had ever swallowed at this table and all the tables before it. And that voice, my voice, would be impossible to ignore. The room was warm, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and buttery rolls. Voices rose and fell around me, laughter swelling like waves. I sat quietly, as I'd been told. My fork touched the food on my plate, but I wasn't really eating. I was listening. I tried to let the chatter wash over me, to pretend it didn't matter that I wasn't included. But then, in the midst of clinking glasses and hushed giggles, I heard it. It was soft, almost hidden, a whisper carried across the table. Her voice, my son's wife. Why did we even invite her? The words pierced me sharper than any knife could. For a moment I froze, uncertain if I'd truly heard it. But the smirk that followed, the way she leaned closer to him, the way his eyes darted quickly toward me and then away, that was confirmation enough. And in that instant, my heart sank. The chair beneath me felt suddenly unstable, as though it couldn't hold the weight of what I carried. My chest tightened. My breath grew shallow. The laughter that followed those words wasn't laughter anymore. It was thunder. Each sound hit me like a blow. Why did they even invite me? The answer screamed in my mind. Out of duty, out of obligation, not out of love, not out of want, not out of joy. I was not their guest. I was their burden. I lowered my eyes, staring at the plate before me. The roast glistened, the potatoes steamed, but all I could taste was the bitterness rising in my throat. I held my fork steady, though my hands trembled. Do you know what it feels like to be in a room full of family, yet feel more alone than if you'd been left outside in the cold? That's what her whisper did. It erased me, but here's the truth. I stayed calm. I did not cry. I did not gasp. I did not let them see the storm inside me. No. I sat there quietly, my face composed, my lips pressed in the faintest of smiles, because that's what they expected, silence. But inside, I was anything but silent. Her words echoed in my mind, not just as an insult, but as a revelation. They wanted me invisible. They wanted me to sit here as if I didn't exist, to fill the chair without filling the air, to be the ghost at their table. But they forgot something. They forgot who I am. They forgot that I'm not just a mother. I'm the mother who raised their world into being. I raised my son through nights when he cried with fever, through mornings when there wasn't enough food, through school days when bullies made him doubt himself. I was the one who stood behind him, pushing him forward when he was too tired to take another step. I taught him to see the truth, to look beyond words, beyond faces, to find what lies beneath. I raised him to be strong, to be honest, to stand tall in the face of cruelty. And now, here they were, thinking they could shrink me into nothing with a whisper. No, I would not let them erase me, but not yet, because silence has its own power. Sometimes silence is weakness, but sometimes silence is preparation. I let their words hang in the air like smoke, bitter and suffocating. I let them believe I hadn't heard. I let them laugh and continue, smug in their illusion of control. But in my heart, I was waiting for the right moment, the moment when my silence would break like glass, when my voice would cut through the room sharper than any whisper could. And as I sat there, I reflected on the irony. Here they were, treating me as if I were invisible. But everything they were, everything they had, was built from the foundation I laid. Their home, their stability, their very chance at joy. All of it was born from the sacrifices I made when no one else stood beside me. They forgot that. They wanted me to fade quietly, to smile politely, to swallow the insult. But I remembered every late shift I worked, every night I stayed awake to make sure he had shoes for school. Every moment I put my own dreams aside so he could chase his. I remembered the times he looked up at me, his little hand in mine, saying, "Mom, you're the best. I'll never forget what you've done for me." And now, he sat beside a woman who could so casually whisper, "Why did we even invite her?" As if I were a stranger, as if my very presence was shameful. The pain of that cut deep, yes. But alongside the pain came something else. Strength, resolve, a reminder that I was not the one who should be ashamed here. Because you see, shame belongs to those who forget their roots. Shame belongs to those who discard love when it's no longer convenient. Shame belongs to the ungrateful, not to me. So I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm. But inside, I was a storm gathering strength. They thought they silenced me. They thought I would remain invisible. But I knew the time would come, and when it did, they would remember. They would remember not the quiet woman they tried to dismiss, but the mother who gave them life, the woman who had a voice strong enough to shatter their carefully built walls. And that voice, my voice, would not be a whisper. It would be thunder. I waited. I listened. I prepared myself. Because when the moment came, I would speak, and every word I spoke would carry the weight of truth. They forgot. I raised them to see the truth, and the truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. The plates of the main course had barely been cleared away when I saw it, the dessert. Golden pie, its crust glistening, sweet cream melting at the edges, little bowls of fruit laid neatly on the table. Dessert. For everyone else, it was a simple thing. Another course, another reason to laugh, another chance to sip their coffee and chatter. But for me, it was more. It was the signal, the turning point, the moment I knew my silence had lasted long enough. I had promised myself patience. I had promised myself I would endure, that I would not ruin the evening, not until the time was right. And as the plates were set before us, as the spoons clinked against china, I felt it in my bones. This was it. I sat still for a moment longer, listening. My son laughed at something his wife said. Their friends nodded along politely, and the conversation spun around me as though I weren't even there. I could feel their comfort in my silence. They thought I had accepted my place, invisible, small, unworthy of voice. And then, slowly, I placed my hand on the table, folded my napkin, and cleared my throat. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was just enough. Enough to silence a room. The laughter stuttered. The conversation fell away. I felt every eye turn to me. For a brief, suspended moment, no one moved. Even the clink of the silverware stilled. And I began to speak. My voice was calm, steady, but it carried with it the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "Thank you," I said softly. "Thank you for dinner. The food has been lovely, and I'm grateful to sit at this table tonight." There was a flicker of relief in their faces. Relief that maybe I would just say something polite, meaningless, and fade back into silence. Relief that I had finally spoken, only to fulfill some gesture of gratitude. But they didn't know me. They didn't know what I had carried in my silence. I let the pause hang just long enough to keep them listening. Then I continued. I've been quiet tonight, quieter than I've ever been in my own family's company. And I'll admit, it wasn't easy. I wanted to laugh with you, to join in the conversation, to feel like I belonged at this table, but I didn't, and I think you all know why. I saw it then, the shift. My son's shoulders tightened, his wife's smile faltered. The air in the room grew heavy, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. I looked down at my hands, folded neatly, then back up at them. You asked me to sit quietly, to not embarrass you, and so I did. I sat in silence, remembering all the years I spent speaking for you, protecting you, standing up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself. I remembered the times I cheered your victories, the nights I prayed through your failures, the mornings I sent you off with food when I had nothing left for myself. And yet tonight, I was told my voice was not welcome. I let that settle. I wanted them to feel it, to see it. Around me, no one dared interrupt. You see, I continued, silence can be many things. It can be peace, it can be patience, but it can also be pain. And tonight, I carried that pain. I carried it as I listened to conversations swirl around me like I wasn't even here. I carried it as I heard laughter that didn't want me, smiles that excluded me, and I carried it most when I heard the whisper. I paused again, letting my gaze fall toward my son's wife. The whisper that asked why I was even invited. The color drained from her face. She shifted in her chair, her eyes darting nervously toward my son. He looked away. But I wasn't finished. I'll tell you why I was invited, I said firmly. Not because you wanted me here, not because you love my company. No, I was invited because I am the reason this family exists. I was invited because I built this. Every piece of food on this table, every chair you sit on, every comfort you take for granted, it came from the sacrifices I made when there was nothing for me but hardship. You sit here in warmth because I endured the cold. You eat in abundance because I went hungry. You laugh now because I once cried in silence. My voice trembled, not from weakness, but from strength that had waited too long to be spoken. I didn't come here tonight to embarrass anyone. I didn't come here to take away from your joy. I came here because, for all my mistakes, for all my flaws, I still love you. I came because I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that I would feel like family again, but instead I was asked to sit quietly, to disappear. I looked straight into my son's eyes then. For the first time that night, he looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw it. The guilt, the shame, the recognition he could no longer escape. I want you to remember something, I told him, my voice low but unshakable. I raised you to see the truth, and the truth is this. No matter how much you try to silence me, I will not disappear. Because mothers do not vanish. Their love, their sacrifice, their voice, it echoes through generations. You cannot erase me. You cannot reduce me to silence. I leaned back then, my words lingering in the heavy stillness of the room. The dessert sat before us, untouched. The sweet aroma filled the air, but no one lifted their fork. It wasn't just dessert on the table anymore. It was truth. And truth, once served, cannot be ignored. I folded my napkin gently, laid it across my lap, and finished with a final, steady breath. So yes, thank you for dinner, but let us not forget what it cost to bring us here. Let us not forget that silence does not mean absence, and let us not forget that a mother's voice, though quiet for a time, will always rise again. And then finally, I picked up my spoon, calm, composed, because my silence had ended, and my truth had been spoken. The silence at the table was deafening. The dessert still sat untouched. the sweetness of it soured by the heaviness of my words. I had spoken my truth, but I wasn't finished. No, not after years of holding it in, of swallowing my pain so that my son could walk forward unburdened. And so I lifted my head, my eyes moving slowly across the table. Each face was frozen, uncertain, afraid to break the tension. My son stared at me as if seeing me for the very first time. Not just as his mother, not just as the woman who birthed him, but as a person with a voice, a heart, and a history of sacrifice. I took a deep breath. My voice was steady, though my heart trembled with the weight of years. "You asked me to be quiet tonight," I began again, my words deliberate, unshakable. "You wanted me small, invisible. But let me tell you something, son. A mother's voice does not vanish just because it makes others uncomfortable. A mother's voice is carried in every sacrifice she has made. And mine has been echoing inside me for far too long." I let my gaze soften, even as I spoke firmly. "You see this woman before you now, and maybe all you notice are the wrinkles, the gray hairs, the hands worn thin. But what you don't see is the girl I once was, a girl who gave up her own dreams so you could chase yours, a young mother who stayed up late into the night, not resting, because the bills had to be paid. I scrubbed floors until my knees ached. I washed dishes until my fingers cracked, and I worked shifts that left me stumbling home with swollen feet. All so you could have food, clothes, a chance at something better than I had." The table was still. No one interrupted. "There were nights I skipped meals, son," I continued, my voice lowering with emotion. "I told you I wasn't hungry, but the truth is, there wasn't enough food for both of us. I let you eat while I went to bed with nothing. Do you remember that winter when the power was out? You thought it was fun to camp by candlelight, to wrap yourself in blankets and pretend it was an adventure. But it wasn't fun for me. I sat there shivering in the dark, praying you wouldn't notice how cold I really was. I held you close so your little body could stay warm while mine froze beside you." My son's head lowered slightly. His wife shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. "And when you were sick, I never left your side. I stayed up through the night, checking your forehead, listening to your breathing, begging the Lord above to keep you safe. I took you to doctors I could barely afford, skipped paying other bills just so you could have the medicine you needed. And I never complained, never once asked you to repay me, because that's what mothers do. We give. We give until there's nothing left, and then we find a way to give more." My voice began to tremble, but not with weakness, with the sheer force of memory. "You wanted me quiet tonight, but let me remind you, it was my voice that sang you to sleep when nightmares woke you. It was my voice that taught you your first words, that read you bedtime stories when I could barely keep my eyes open. And when you grew older, it was my voice that defended you. To teachers, to neighbors, to anyone who doubted you, I raised you with words. I lifted you with words. And now you want me to erase that voice because it embarrasses you?" I leaned forward, my hands resting firmly on the table. "No, that will not happen, because a mother's voice cannot be erased. It lives in you. Whether you want it or not, it lives in every fiber of who you are." The room grew heavier, denser. Even the sound of the clock ticking seemed distant. You sit here, enjoying this home, this table, this life. But don't forget where it came from. Don't forget that the path you walk was carved by the bleeding hands of your mother. The meals you eat were once provided by nights. I came home smelling of grease, exhausted from fast food shifts that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. The roof over your head is built from years of me saying no to myself so I could say yes to you. I stopped then, my throat tightening. I looked down at my hands, worn and thin, trembling against the polished wood. "I never asked for much," I whispered. "Not gifts, not riches, not recognition. All I ever wanted was to be included, to be loved, to be respected as the mother who gave everything for you. And yet tonight, you told me to sit quietly, as if I were nothing." I lifted my gaze, locking eyes with him again. "I will not sit quietly anymore." The words hung like thunder in the air. I may not have much left. My youth is gone. My body aches. My strength is not what it once was. But my voice remains. And you, my son, will hear it, because it was my voice that raised you, and it will not be silenced now. No one moved. The weight of it pressed down on every person at the table. Even the flickering of the candles seemed subdued, as though the very air bowed in reverence to the truth that had been spoken. I softened then, my tone lowering, though no less firm. "I don't say these things to shame you, son. I say them because I love you. Because even now, after all of this, my love for you remains stronger than the pain you've caused me. You can push me away. You can try to silence me. You can even pretend I don't exist. But you cannot erase the truth. You cannot erase the love that carried you this far. And you cannot erase the mother who gave you life." I leaned back, my chest rising and falling, the heaviness of my words filling the room. The dessert still sat before us, untouched, forgotten, but it didn't matter. The sweetness of pie could never compare to the bitterness of truth, or the strength it took to finally speak it aloud. And so I let silence reclaim the table, not because I had been silenced, but because my words now lived inside them, echoing, undeniable. This time it was their turn to sit in silence. The room was heavy with silence. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. My words still lingered in the air, thick as smoke after a fire, impossible to ignore, impossible to sweep away. I looked around the table slowly, my eyes meeting the faces of those who moments ago laughed freely while I sat in silence. Now their laughter was gone, replaced by something deeper, shame perhaps, or recognition. My son avoided my eyes. He stared down at his plate, his fork resting limply between his fingers, as if the weight of it was too much to hold. His shoulders, once squared with pride, had slumped ever so slightly, as though my truth had pressed down upon him. Beside him, his wife shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes lowered, her lips pressed into a thin line. The same woman who had whispered, "Why did we even invite her?" now had nothing to say at all. Her silence spoke louder than her words ever could. Around the table, no one reached for dessert. The sweetness had lost its place. The pie, once the centerpiece, now sat untouched, a silent witness to the bitterness of what had been revealed. I sat tall, my hands folded neatly in my lap. For the first time that evening, I wasn't holding back. I wasn't shrinking. No, I was proud. Proud not because I had scolded or embarrassed, but because I had finally spoken my truth. For years I had carried those words like stones in my chest, weighing me down. Tonight I laid them out, one by one, in front of those who needed to hear them most, and though their faces were stunned, though the silence was sharp, I felt lighter than I had in years. I rose slowly from my chair. The legs of it scraped softly against the floor, breaking the unbearable stillness. Every eye lifted to me, but still no one spoke. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and with every step toward the door, I carried myself not as a woman scorned, not as a mother silenced, but as a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. At the doorway, I paused. I turned just once, my gaze steady on the table where my son and his family sat, their plates full, but their hearts empty. "They wanted me quiet," I said softly, but firmly, my voice ringing with finality. But at dessert, I served more than sweetness. I served respect. And with that, I walked out into the night, not broken, not bitter, but proud.